Hey guys, welcome to today's video where we're going to be discussing the Miami Dolphins defense and what to expect from them in 2020. Before we get started, please like and subscribe. It really helps my channel grow, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Last season, the Miami Dolphins defense was pretty bad. They were 30th in total points allowed, 26th in passing yards allowed, 27th in rushing yards allowed, 32nd in points allowed, and they were tied for 28th in takeaways. Now, I'm going to argue why those numbers are useless. So those numbers, firstly, are skewed. If you look at the Dolphins' first 4 games, they gave up 33% of their points in only 25% of all their games. And therefore, those first 4 games really messed with the Miami Dolphins stats. In fact, if you look at the trending stats via Sharp Football Stats, Miami's defense was trending up to 18th in pass defensive success and 10th in rush defensive success for the last few weeks of the season, which was up from 31st and 25th for the entire season, respectively. So what were some positives from last season? The Dolphins' defense tied for 11th best in preventing explosive runs. They ranked 14th best in defensive success rate when opponents targeted wide receivers, and they were very good against tight ends in the red zone. They actually ranked 3rd best out of all teams in defensive success rate when opponents targeted tight ends in the red zone. Plus, Miami ranked as the 7th most successful defensive team in red zone defense in quarters 2 and 3, but where they lacked that red zone defense were in the first and fourth quarters, where they ranked 24th and 27th respectively. So what does that mean? That basically means that the Dolphins defense last season was overall not that good, but in different situations and at different times, they were actually quite solid. But what does Brian Flores like to do scheme-wise? So Brian Flores loves versatility with his players, and he likes players that can play all over the football field. That was one of the things with Minkah Fitzpatrick that ended up making him go to the Steelers. Flores wanted to play him in multiple positions, and Fitzpatrick just didn't want to play the places that the Dolphins wanted him to be in. He wanted to be that ball-hawking safety, and the Dolphins wanted him to line up in the box and stuff like that, and he just wasn't having it. Also, the Dolphins are known as one of the more man defense-heavy schemes in the NFL. That obviously comes from New England with Brian Flores, but if you look at the other teams that are linked to Bill Belichick and the Patriots, like the Detroit Lions with Matt Patricia, you'll see they run a lot of man-heavy schemes too. However, how has this Dolphins defense improved in the offseason, and what are they going to look like in 2020? I'm going to start talking about the players. So I'm going to start up front, and I'm going to start with none other than the big defensive tackle, Davon Godchaux. Godchaux is quietly making a great name for himself. He was one of the best defensive tackles within 2 yards of the line of scrimmage last season, and he had 2 sacks last year, which was good for him. 75 combined tackles, that was 33 solo tackles, and 42 assisted tackles. Godchaux is coming into his contract season, and he's in line for a big contract, I think. I think he could get anywhere between $6 to $10 million a year. And the Dolphins really like Godchaux as that interior defensive lineman that can just be a disruptor. He's a great run stopper. And although Davon Godchaux only got a 64.1 PFF grade last season, I still think he's a better player than that. I'm just going to say it now. I don't love PFF for grading players, but I think it gives a good idea of overall where the players are at. Now let's go to the man right next to him in Christian Wilkins. Wilkins, the former Clemson defensive tackle, was drafted 13th overall last season. And last season, his rookie season, was a season of ups and downs. I mean, he got ejected from a game, but at the same time, he ended up catching a touchdown pass against the Bengals. He was all over the place. But in the second half of the season is really where he turned it on. He had his first sack against the Jets, and he ended the season with 2 sacks, 56 combined tackles, 30 solo tackles, and 26 assisted tackles. And he played in all 16 games, although he did get ejected pretty early in that Buffalo game. But he started in 14 games, and I think next season is where he's going to take that next step. I mean, he earned a 64.4 PFF player grade. As I said, that's not the best for indicating if players were successful or not. But overall, that just gives you an idea of where Christian Wilkins is at. Now let's talk about the new pass rushers that the Dolphins brought in free agency, Emmanuel Ogbah and Shaq Lawson. Both of them are written down on the depth chart as linebackers, but they're probably going to be our pass rushers next season. So let's start with Ogbah. Ogbah was really, really solid last year in his 10 games. He had 5.5 sacks in those 10 games, 32 combined tackles, 23 solo tackles, and 9 assisted tackles. He's a big dude. He's 6'4", 275. He's able to bend and get to the quarterback, and I think he is going to be a really, really great pass rusher for the Dolphins defense. Last season, the Dolphins defense best pass rusher was Taco Charlton, who 1 is no longer in Miami, but 2, he only had 5 sacks. So really getting a guy who can probably in a full season have 6 to 8, maybe even 10 sacks is a really nice luxury to have. Now let's go to the other guy, Shaq Lawson, who's coming from the Bills. Every season, Shaq Lawson has improved in the NFL. That's what you want to see. His first season, he had 2 sacks. Second season, he had 4 sacks. Third season, he had 4 sacks again. But in his fourth season, he had 6.5 sacks. That's what you like to see from a player coming to the Miami Dolphins. He's on a decent-sized contract, 3 years, $30 million. And for him to be getting that amount of money, the Dolphins want him to produce. If he can rack up maybe 8 to 10 sacks, that's great for the Dolphins. And he played in 15 games last year. He's durable, but he didn't start any games. So if he's going to start more games, he probably will next season. You could see those 6.5 sacks go up to maybe 8 or 9 sacks. So look out for Shaq Lawson next season. Now let's go to the rookies that the Dolphins picked up on the defensive line. Let's start with Raekwon Davis, the defensive lineman from Alabama. So Raekwon Davis was a super solid defensive lineman, interior defensive lineman at Alabama. He's big, he's physical, and he could, in theory, play that nose tackle position that the Dolphins have not had for a while now. What Raekwon Davis adds is he adds a playmaking presence to that interior defensive line, and I think Raekwon Davis is a guy that could be really solid. They also brought in Jason Strowbridge in the 5th round. Strowbridge was not that amazing at North Carolina, but he was a solid player nonetheless. I mean, he had 6 tackles for loss last year, 2.5 sacks, and he's going to be a project guy. He's not going to start right away. He's probably going to be on that rotational roster right there. But Strowbridge is physical. He's big. He can get to the quarterback, and I think he could be a good player for the future. Also, they brought in Curtis Weaver in the 5th round, which could end up being the steal of the draft. Weaver's not super athletic for a pass rusher. He's 6'3", 265 pounds, and last season at Boise State was his best season. Weaver is the all-time leader in sacks in the Mountain Conference. He had 13.5 sacks last year, 9.5 the year before, and 11 sacks in his first season at Boise State. He had 19.5 tackles for loss last year. I mean, Curtis Weaver is a game wrecker. He kind of reminds me of a little bit of AJ Epinesa, and I mean that as in both of those players are players that, 1, are super gifted on the football field, 2, they can be game wreckers, and 3, they don't have the biggest athletic or physical stats that would make them go higher up in the draft. Obviously, Epinesa was drafted in the 2nd round, but Curtis Weaver could have been a 2nd or 3rd round pick. He has the talent. It's just he doesn't have the physical measurables. Anyway, I love the Curtis Weaver pick, and I think he could end up being a really, really good player for the Miami Dolphins. So now we've talked about the defensive line, defensive front. Obviously, that was a big focal point for Chris Grier in the Dolphins draft and through the Dolphins offseason. But now let's talk about the linebackers. Vince Biegel made a really, really nice name for himself last season. Biegel, formerly of the Green Bay Packers as well as the New Orleans Saints, came to Miami last season in the Kiko Alonso trade. He had 2.5 sacks, 59 combined tackles, 27 solo, and 32 assisted. And I thought Vince Biegel was an exciting player to watch last season. Watch out for Vince Biegel. I think he could take the next step in 2020 and really establish himself as a solid linebacker in the NFL. However, one of my favorite linebackers on this Miami Dolphins defense is Raekwon McMillan. If this guy is healthy, he is a dominant middle linebacker. Last season in 2019, he only played in 13 games, and he had 72 combined tackles, 35 solo tackles, and 37 assisted tackles. The thing with Raekwon McMillan is his inability to stay on the football field. In 2017, that was his rookie season. He missed all of 2017 due to injury, but 2018 was his first and only full season in the NFL. He played 16 games. He had 105 combined tackles, 69 solo tackles, and 36 assisted tackles. He's going to be one of those core players on that defensive unit, and he had a 63.9 PFF player grade. I don't think that accurately represents him, what he was able to do last year and what he's been able to do in the past. My favorite player on this defense, though, it's got to be Jerome Baker. I love Jerome Baker. Former 3rd-round pick in 2018, Baker has made a real nice name for himself in the NFL. He had 1.5 sacks last year, and he led the Miami Dolphins defense with 126 combined tackles. Baker is a game wrecker. He's all over the football field. He had a few interceptions in his career. He had 1 in 2019 against Eli Manning, and he had 1 in 2018 against the Jets. So watch out for Jerome Baker as he continues to make a name for himself on that Dolphins defense. Now let's talk about some of the guys they brought in at the linebacker position this offseason. They brought in the former Super Bowl champion, Kamu Grugier-Hill, formerly of the Eagles. Last season, he played in 10 games. He's probably going to end up being a rotational piece for this Dolphins defense, but nonetheless, it's good to have guys that can play in the system, who can play in different areas, who can be versatile, who can be on the special teams. And that's what Kamu Grugier-Hill is. I think he could be a valuable asset for this Dolphins defense. Also, they brought in Elandon Roberts. I think Elandon Roberts was a super smart acquisition. Obviously, formerly of the Patriots, he knows Brian Flores' scheme. He knows Josh Boyer's scheme. And I think Elandon Roberts could be a great linebacker addition for this Dolphins defense. He's going to fit in seamlessly. He can play all over the field. And that versatility is really going to help Brian Flores and the Dolphins defense next season. The guy I really want to talk about is a guy that I've admired for a little bit, Kyle Van Noy. Van Noy, two-time Super Bowl champion, comes from New England. Same thing that I talked about with Elandon Roberts. He knows Brian Flores' system. He knows what Josh Boyer likes to do. And this man is great. Last season, he was an absolute game wrecker. He had 6.5 sacks, 56 combined tackles. And in New England, they kind of used him as a Swiss Army knife linebacker. And I think Brian Flores runs a very similar system to what New England likes to do. So look for Kyle Van Noy to have a similar role to what he had in New England. He can be all over the football field. He can rush the passer. He can make plays against the run. And I think he's a great addition for this Dolphins defense. Now on to the secondary. This secondary is probably one of the most improved units from 2019. And to be honest, I think they could have the best cornerbacks in the NFL and maybe the best secondary in the NFL. So let's start with Xavien Howard. Xavien Howard last season was banged up. If he could have stayed healthy, he would have been really solid. But nonetheless, last season was not his season. He played in 5 games, had an interception against the Steelers, and had 4 pass deflections. But that's not a real representation of what Xavien Howard is. His 2018 Pro Bowl season is really where it's at. In 2018, he had 7 interceptions, 12 pass deflections, 35 tackles, and he was a shutdown, lockdown Pro Bowl type corner. And he actually ended up making the Pro Bowl in 2018. If Xavien Howard can stay on the field, stay out of trouble off the field too, he is going to be the cornerstone corner of this Dolphins secondary. But the guy that they also brought in the offseason is Byron Jones. Byron Jones is not only an elite corner, he's not only a top 10 corner, but he's a perfect scheme fit for this Miami Dolphins defense. As I've said earlier, this Dolphins defense loves to be a man-heavy scheme, and it happens to be that Byron Jones is a top 5 man coverage corner in the NFL. He's a lockdown, shutdown corner, and although he doesn't rack up interceptions, he takes wide receivers out of ball games. Having a guy like Byron Jones and Xavien Howard in that secondary is going to make this defense very hard to throw against. Last season, although Byron Jones didn't have any interceptions, he still had 46 combined tackles. But if you look at his PFF grade for a second, he had a 76.1 PFF grade, which is really, really good. As I said, don't put all your money in the PFF grades, but nonetheless, Byron Jones is a top 10 corner in the NFL. He's a top 5 press man coverage corner in the NFL, and he's a perfect scheme fit for Brian Flores. Now let's talk about the rookie first-round pick, 30th overall in Noah Igbinoghene. Igbinoghene is another perfect scheme fit for this Dolphins defense. He's fast, he's versatile, and he excels at man coverage, and that's exactly what Brian Flores is looking from in a young corner. He's probably going to be the starting slot corner for the Dolphins defense next season, and I love what he did at Auburn last season. He had 42 total tackles. He didn't have an interception. He's not a big interception guy like Byron Jones, but nonetheless, they're both players that can get to the football. They can shut down guys, and they're fast, they're quick, and they have really, really good abilities at man coverage, which is exactly what we need in Miami. Now let's go to the 4th cornerback. This defensive back room is going to be loaded next season. I'm so excited to see this Dolphins defense work, but let's just talk about Nik Needham for a second. Nik Needham, when Xavien Howard went down with injury, when that Dolphins defense basically had nobody, he really shined. He stepped up and showed that he could be a legitimate starter on this Dolphins secondary. Last season, he had 1 sack against Sam Darnold in that Jets game. He had 54 combined tackles, 11 pass deflections, 1 forced fumble. He was all over the field, 2 interceptions too, 1 against the Colts. I mean, he was everywhere. I loved watching him. I think he was a really, really good corner, and he showed that he could play in Brian Flores' system. I think he ended up going undrafted last season, and he was a great pickup. I mean, the Dolphins did really well with their undrafted players. They got Nik Needham. They got Preston Williams. So I think the Dolphins scouting department is doing a really good job, and Nik Needham could be a great corner in 2020. Now let's go to the safety position. The safety position is going to struggle next season. I mean, obviously they lost Minkah Fitzpatrick last year for that first-round pick. That's over and in the back burner. But who do they have? They have Eric Rowe, who's probably going to be playing safety next year. Last year for the Dolphins, he had 81 combined tackles, 54 solo, and 27 assisted. But what he really was a great player all over the football field. He ended up having an interception against Tom Brady and the Patriots. It was a pick 6. He was lights out. I thought he was one of the better offseason moves that the Dolphins made last season. He was brought in not for that much money, and I think his familiarity, obviously, with the New England Patriots defensive scheme and with Brian Flores really helped him excel in his first year. Hopefully he can take that next step in his second year in Miami and just really prove to the Dolphins that he is a safety that can be there for the long run. Now let's talk about a guy who's been in Miami for a while, Bobby McCain. Bobby McCain last year played a little free safety. He had 25 combined tackles, 19 solos, 6 assisted. but he had 3 pass deflections and 2 interceptions. He's another guy who can be a solid safety. And at the end of the day, Bobby McCain has basically played everywhere in the secondary. If someone goes down with injury, I think he could possibly play at the slot corner. He could be a corner. And he could be a valuable member of this Dolphins defense just because of how versatile he is. As I've said, Brian Flores really likes versatile players, and Bobby McCain is exactly that. Also, the Dolphins brought in Byron Jones in the 3rd round, 70th overall, out of Texas. Now, what I love about Byron Jones and what he was really good at Texas is not his ability to shut down players. I mean, he's not that kind of player. But what he is, he had 86 combined tackles. But what I really love about him is his ability to play all over the football field, to be versatile. And that's what the Dolphins defense wants. I mean, he had a sack last year, had 4.5 tackles for loss. He was able to get to the football. He had 2 interceptions. He had 1 the year before. So he racks up the stats. He's good all over the football field. He's a versatile player. And if this Dolphins secondary loses a few players, I think he could play safety. I mean, there are other safeties on this roster like Adrian Colbert and Stephen Parker, and as well as at the corner position, they have guys like Jamal Perry. But I don't really want to get into them. I think that the guys I mentioned and the guys I talked about in a little bit of detail are the guys that are going to be significant players for this Dolphins defense in 2020. So what I love about this Dolphins defense is they made smart moves in the offseason. They rebuilt the trenches on the defense side of the football. They brought in Curtis Weaver. They brought in guys like Raekwon Davis. They brought in guys like Shaq Lawson, Emmanuel Ogbah, and I think those guys are going to create a core of guys who can be really solid about getting to the quarterback as well as shutting down the run game. Also, linebacker-wise, they brought in Kyle Van Noy. They brought in Kamu Grugier-Hill. They brought in Elandon Roberts. Those are guys who can be instant impact players who can make a difference. And in the secondary, they brought in Igbinoghene. They brought in Byron Jones, who's probably the biggest fish that they brought in the free agency pool. And they also brought in Brandon Jones in the draft. I love what they did. They added so much talent to the roster. And although talent doesn't necessarily mean more wins, doesn't mean more production, they all these players really fit Brian Flores' defense. Either they're big, physical, they're versatile, or they're from New England, so you know they're going to fit well because Brian Flores basically does what New England does. And also, if you look at Byron Jones, he's a perfect scheme fit just because of that man coverage. I mean, Noah Igbinoghene is a great man coverage corner, so I think the Dolphins scouting department did a great job this offseason. And I think Brian Flores and Chris Grier did a great job this offseason. And all in all, for me, I don't think it's ludicrous to say that they could be a top 15 defensive unit in 2020, if not a top 10 defensive unit in 2020. So Dolphins fans, get excited for these new Dolphins players to be on this Dolphins defense, and I think this Dolphins defense could really improve in 2020.
Now that you've reached the end of my video, I want to thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe as it helps my channel out, and check out my other videos on my channel. Also, you can follow my Instagram, the link is in the description down below, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Until next time, see ya.